What if Dr. Strange came into Warhammer 40,000? The Sorcerer Supreme awakens upon dead Wraithbone, his mystic senses overwhelmed by the screaming warp. Reality here bends to different laws, where his magic draws the hungry gaze of ancient gods. The Eye of Agamotto flares with warning as shadowy figures converge from across the stars. Inquisition hunters, alien seers, and servants of the Changer of Ways, all seeking the power he represents. In a universe where hope is the cruelest lie, can even the master of the mystic arts resist the corruption that taints all magic? The void above the craft world held nothing but stars and silence. Then it split open. Reality tore like parchment, edges glowing with impossible colors as a human figure tumbled through. Dr. Stephen Strange fell through the rent in space, his cloak of levitation billowing around him as he crashed onto the Wraithbone's surface. The impact drove the breath from his lungs. Pain lanced through his trembling hands. He lay there, gasping. This was wrong. The spell had gone awry, catastrophically so. The dimensional transit should have been a controlled passage, not this violent ejection into where? Strange pushed himself upright, the cloak steadying him as he surveyed his surroundings. The platform beneath him was smooth, pearlescent material unlike any substance he had encountered. It hummed with latent energy. Around him rose graceful spires and arches, their elegance marred by scorch marks and structural damage. The air tasted stale, recycled countless times. No living presence registered to his mystic senses. And yet, something watched him. Something vast and hungry beyond the veil of reality. Strange felt its attention like a weight pressing down on his psyche. The walls between dimensions were paper-thin here, barely containing the howling madness beyond. Strange raised his hands, scarred fingers tracing familiar patterns to center himself. Golden mandalas flickered into existence, but they, warped and twisted, their geometry shifting unnaturally. The mystical energies he commanded seemed to draw that distant attention closer, like blood in water. "Eye of Agamotto," he whispered. "Show me this realm." The amulet at his chest flared with green light. Strange gasped as visions assaulted him. A galaxy burning. A golden throne occupied by a withered corpse that was somehow alive. Armies of impossible scale clashing across stars. Entities of such malevolence that even Dormammu would pause. And everywhere, a storm of souls and emotions, feeding four impossibly vast consciousnesses. Strange severed the connection, staggering backward. The eye dimmed, but the knowledge remained. This was not his universe, nor any parallel he had visited. This was somewhere fundamentally different, where the very fabric of reality operated on alien principles, where magic and psychic energy were fundamentally intertwined with this warp he had glimpsed. A distant rumble drew his attention. Through the transparent dome above, Strange saw a ship approaching the dead craft world. Its design spoke of human origin, though twisted by some dark technological aesthetic. Black, angular, bristling with weapons, Strange sensed the minds aboard. Human, but many were altered, augmented, and they had detected his arrival. Strange gathered his power, centering himself despite the strange fluctuations in the mystical energies around him. The cloak of levitation tightened around his shoulders as he moved deeper into the abandoned structure, seeking to understand this place before confronting its inhabitants. The corridors within the craft world were organic in design, flowing and graceful. Strange passed empty chambers filled with dust-covered artifacts of alien manufacture. His fingers brushed a crystalline structure, and it responded with a flicker of stored memories. Elegant, tall beings moving through these same halls. Their minds, unlike human thought, ancient and sorrowful. Eldar, Strange, murmured, the knowledge filtering into his consciousness from the psychic imprint. This was their home. A piercing wail cut through his exploration, warning systems activating after untold years of silence. The humans had boarded. Strange moved swiftly through the corridors, following his instincts toward the heart of the structure. If this was to be a confrontation, better to choose the ground. He entered a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadows above. At its center stood a complex apparatus, a throne of sorts surrounded by crystalline technology. The throne called to him with silent urgency. Strange approached cautiously, recognizing its purpose without knowing how: a nexus, a gateway, perhaps his means of return. The chamber doors blasted inward in a shower of wraithbone fragments. Armored figures stormed through, weapons raised. Their armor was ornate, adorned with skulls and purity seals, crimson robes flowing beneath black plate. "In the name of the Holy Ordos of the Emperor's Inquisition, you will surrender," which, called their leader, a woman whose face was half augmetic, gleaming metal fused with stern flesh. Her mind burned with righteous conviction that Strange could feel even at this distance. Strange raised his hands slowly. "I mean no harm. I am a visitor to your reality, brought here by accident." The woman laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "The warp takes none by accident, sorcerer. Your foul powers have been detected across 3 sectors. The taint of chaos surrounds you." "I assure you, I serve no chaos," Strange replied, his mind racing to contextualize what he had learned from the Eye's vision. These humans feared the warp, the psychic dimension that overlapped their reality. They associated its power with corruption. Not entirely wrong, given what he had sensed lurking there. "Lies," she spat. "Restrain him." 2 of her soldiers advanced, carrying strange devices that hummed with technology. Strange did not recognize. They projected a field that made his mystical senses dull, like cotton in his ears. Null fields of some kind. Strange acted. His hands swept outward, the winds of Watum manifesting as golden streams that knocked the advancing soldiers back. But the spell flickered, warping at the edges as the ambient energy of this realm interfered with its structure. The Inquisitor raised her weapon, a pistol that crackled with blue energy. "Sorcery," she hissed. "The sentence is death." The shot never came. A new sound interrupted, a wet, tearing noise from behind the Inquisition forces. Screams erupted as something moved among the armored humans with impossible speed. Strange watched in horror as the rearguard soldiers were torn apart. Blood sprayed across the walls as shadowy figures danced through their ranks. Where they touched, armor split and flesh separated. The attackers moved like liquid darkness, their forms slender and graceful, wielding blades that shimmered with deadly energy. The Inquisitor whirled, firing repeatedly into the new threat. "Drukhari," she shouted. "Defend yourselves." Strange recognized the racial connection to the craft world's former inhabitants, but these newcomers radiated cruelty and predatory glee where the memories had shown nobility. They fought with sadistic precision, their movements blindingly fast. Caught between hostile forces, Strange made his decision. He levitated upward, the cloak carrying him above the battle as he gathered his power. The 7 rings of Ragador encircled his fists as he sought to contain rather than kill. Golden bands of energy lashed out, wrapping around combatants from both sides, but something interfered. The spell bands warped, twisting as they made contact with the Drukhari raiders. Their weapons seemed to drink in the mystical energy, hungrily devouring it. One of the dark warriors looked up at Strange, features hidden behind a grotesque mask. "A new plaything," it hissed, voice laden with malicious delight. "Your soul shines brightly, Mon K sorcerer." Strange felt a chill at the creature's words. These beings fed on suffering, he realized. Their very presence resonated with the darker aspects of the warp he had glimpsed. The battle below escalated. The Inquisition forces fought with desperate fury, but they were outmatched by the raiders' speed and savagery. Strange saw the Inquisitor herself dueling with what appeared to be the Drukhari leader, her power sword clashing against wickedly curved blades. Strange gathered his concentration, adapting his spells to this reality's peculiar energies. He traced complex patterns in the air, feeling the resistance of this universe's natural laws. The mirror dimension might not exist here, but he could create something similar. Reality fractured around the combatants as Strange imposed his will upon it. The chamber seemed to fold inward, reflective surfaces multiplying and disorienting both human and Xenos fighters. In this controlled space, Strange could better direct his powers. The Drukhari hissed in confusion and anger, their attacks striking mirror images that shattered into golden sparks. The Inquisition troops huddled together, equally disoriented but taking the opportunity to regroup. Strange descended to the chamber floor, hands constantly moving to maintain the dimensional fold. He approached the Inquisitor, who trained her weapon on him despite her injuries. "I can get your people out of here," Strange said, "but you must trust me." "Trust a sorcerer?" Blood trickled from her augmetic interface. "I would sooner trust a daemon." "Then trust survival," Strange countered. "Those creatures want to take you alive for purposes I suspect you understand better than I." Something flickered in her human eye. Fear. She knew the reputation of these raiders. "What do you propose, Witch?" "A temporary alliance. I will hold them back while you withdraw to your ship. In return, you allow me time to study this craft world before you destroy it. What makes you think destruction is our intent?" "Experience," Strange said simply. A screech of rage announced that the Drukhari were adapting to his dimensional manipulation. Reflective surfaces cracked as wickedly barbed hooks struck them from multiple angles. "Decide quickly," Strange urged. The Inquisitor's face hardened. "Sergeant Colvax, get the wounded to the specular umbrum. I will cover our retreat with this." She hesitated. Temporary asset. The surviving soldiers began their withdrawal, carrying those too injured to walk. The Inquisitor remained, her power sword humming with energy. "I am Inquisitor Vale of the Ordo Hereticus," she said. "Betray us, and the Imperium's wrath will follow you across the stars." "Dr. Stephen Strange," he replied, "and I have no intention of making more enemies today." The mirror dimension construct shattered completely as the Drukhari launched a coordinated assault. Their leader landed before Strange and Vale, twin blades dripping with the blood of fallen Inquisition troops. "Such delicious fear," the leader purred, removing his helmet to reveal a gaunt, pale face of disturbing beauty. "The human psyker reeks of displacement. His soul is untouched by she who thirsts. A rare delicacy." Strange raised his hands, mystic shields forming before him. "I don't know who she who thirsts is, but no one will be feasting on souls today." The Drukhari laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Your ignorance is remarkable. You stand before Archon Vidrax of the Flayed Nerve Cabal. Your suffering will be legendary." Strange glanced at Vale. "Get your people clear. I'll handle this." To his surprise, she nodded curtly and backed toward the exit, firing covering shots as she retreated. Alone now, Strange faced the Drukhari raiders. 12 of them, all armed with weapons that seemed designed to inflict maximum pain. Their minds radiated a hunger that went beyond physical need, a spiritual starvation that could never be satisfied. "Impressive toys," Strange said, gesturing at their weapons. "But you're not the first extra-dimensional predators I've encountered." He struck first, abandoning defensive magic for the more aggressive bolts of bedevilment. Crimson energy lanced from his fingertips, striking 3 raiders simultaneously. They convulsed, their nervous systems overloaded by mystical current. The Archon moved with shocking speed, closing the distance to Strange before the bodies of his subordinates hit the floor. His blades whirled in complex patterns, each strike aimed at nerve clusters rather than vital organs. Strange's cloak yanked him backward, barely avoiding evisceration. He countered with the bands of Sitarak, crimson bindings wrapping around the Archon's limbs. But the Dark Warrior's armor seemed to absorb the spell's energy, the bindings dissolving into mist. "Your power tastes of distant realms," Vidrax hissed. "The homunculi will enjoy dissecting its secrets from your brain." The remaining Drukhari circled, cutting off avenues of escape. Strange realized he needed to adapt further to this reality's rules. These beings had evolved in a universe where psychic energy was a fundamental force. His earth-based mysticism needed translation. Tzeentch focused on the ambient energy of the craft world itself. The Wraithbone hummed with latent psychic potential, dormant but accessible. He reached out with his consciousness, connecting to it as he might tap a ley line in his home dimension. Power surged through him, different but usable. Tzeentch channeled it through the familiar forms of the Vishanti spells, but allowed the energy to shape itself according to the craft world's nature. Runes appeared in the air around him, glowing with blue-white light. The Drukhari faltered, recognizing the symbols of their ancient kindred. Tzeentch didn't understand their meaning, but he felt their purpose: warding, protection, banishment. Impossible, Vidrax snarled. No Mon-K can wield the old runes. Tzeentch brought his hands together, completing the spell. The runes expanded outward in a wave of force, striking the Drukhari with devastating effect. Where they touched, the raiders' shadows seemed to separate from their bodies, torn away by the craft world's awakened defenses. The Archon alone withstood the assault, though even he staggered backward, his armor smoking where the runes had struck. His face contorted with rage and something else: fear. "This is not over, sorcerer," he spat, activating a device on his wrist. A shimmering portal opened behind him. "Your soul is marked now. We will meet again when you have exhausted yourself against the Imperium's dogs." Vidrax and his surviving warriors retreated through the portal, which collapsed behind them in a shower of dark light. Tzeentch released his hold on the craft world's energy, feeling the drain of channeling such alien power. His hands trembled more violently than usual, the old injuries protesting the strain. The chamber fell silent, scattered with the bodies of fallen Inquisition troops and dark stains where Drukhari had stood. Tzeentch turned toward the central throne, his original objective before the interruption. A slow clapping echoed through the chamber. "Most impressive, Doctor," came a cultured voice. "You adapt quickly." At the entrance stood a tall figure in ornate power armor of midnight blue, adorned with arcane symbols. Unlike the Inquisition forces, his armor was adorned with eyes and bird motifs. He carried no visible weapon, yet radiated power that made Tzeentch's mystic senses flare in warning. "Another interested party?" Tzeentch asked wearily. "This is becoming quite the popular destination." The figure advanced with measured steps. His armor hummed with contained energy, psychic resonance emanating from inscribed wards. "Forgive the intrusion. I am Ahazek Ahriman, former chief librarian of the Thousand Suns Legion." Something in the man's tone raised Tzeentch's hackles. There was knowledge in those eyes that went beyond mortal learning, and corruption swimming beneath the surface of disciplined thought. "You're not with the Inquisition," Tzeentch observed. "Indeed not." Ahriman gestured, and the bodies on the floor burst into blue flame, consuming them utterly. "My interests are rather at odds with Imperial doctrine." Tzeentch maintained his distance, hands ready to weave defensive spells. "And what interests bring you to this dead craft world?" "Initially, an unusual psychic disturbance. Your arrival tore quite a hole in the Immaterium's fabric." Ahriman studied him with unnerving intensity. "But now, you yourself are far more intriguing. You wield power like a Psyker, yet your techniques are structured differently. Your soul bears no mark of the Empyrean's touch, yet you channel its energies." "I'm not from your reality," Tzeentch said cautiously. "Where I come from, we call it magic, not psychic power." "Semantics," Ahriman waved dismissively. "Power is power, regardless of the names mortals give it. And you, Dr. Tzeentch, possess power that might serve a greater purpose." "I'm not interested in serving anyone's purpose but my own," Tzeentch replied, "which is primarily to understand where I am and how to return home." Ahriman laughed softly. "Noble sentiment. But in this universe, all power serves something, whether willingly or not." He gestured to the throne. "You sought the Infinity Circuit. You thought it might provide answers, or perhaps a way back to your reality. Strange didn't confirm or deny this, but his silence was answer enough. "It cannot help you," Ahriman continued. "This craft world died too long ago. Its spirit stones are empty, its pathways closed." He extended an armored hand. "I, however, possess knowledge that spans millennia. The libraries of Prospero, the forbidden archives of Terra, the Black Library itself. I have glimpsed secrets that would allow a man of your talents to traverse realities at will." An offer was tempting, Strange had to admit, this being clearly possessed vast knowledge. But the corruption that swirled within him was unmistakable, reminiscent of practitioners who had dealt with Dormammu or Shuma Gorath. "Knowledge with strings attached is rarely worth the cost," Strange said. "I'll find my own way." Ahriman's posture stiffened. "You speak as one who has not yet comprehended the nature of this reality, Doctor. Here, the warp touches all. It is not a matter of if you will be claimed, but by whom." His voice lowered. "And Tzeentch has already taken notice of you." The name sent a chill through Strange, one of the entities he had glimpsed through the eye. A consciousness of cosmic scale, feeding on hope, ambition, and change. "I've dealt with dimensional entities before," Strange said firmly. "I am not without defenses." "So I witnessed," Ahriman acknowledged. "Your adaptation of Aeldari rune magic was unprecedented. But it merely confirms my suspicion that you would be a valuable ally." He paused. "Or a dangerous rival." The threat hung in the air between them. Strange felt the gathering of power around Ahriman, warp energy coalescing around his armored form. "I don't want a conflict," Strange said. "But I won't be coerced either." "Then enlightenment through adversity it shall be." Ahriman raised his hand, and reality seemed to bend around him. "Show me the limits of your dimensional magic, Doctor." The attack came not as energy or force, but as conceptual change. The air between them transformed, molecules rearranging into toxic compounds. Simultaneously, the wraithbone floor beneath Strange transmuted into quicksilver, attempting to engulf his feet. Strange reacted instinctively, the cloak lifting him above the spreading liquid metal as he conjured the shield of the seraphim against the poisonous air. Golden light pushed back against the corruption, creating a bubble of protected space. "Impressive reflexes," Ahriman commented, "but merely defensive." Strange had no intention of remaining defensive. He had witnessed enough to understand that this reality's psychic powers operated on principles similar to certain forms of magic. Matter manipulation, energy projection, dimensional interference. The difference was one of technique and source, not fundamental possibility. He gathered his power, drawing on both his own reserves and the ambient energy of the craft world. The crimson bands of Sitarak manifested, but Strange modified the spell, incorporating elements of this universe's symbolic language that he had glimpsed in Ahriman's armor runes. The bands shot forth, glowing with hybridized energy. Where they touched Ahriman's protective aura, they did not dissolve as they had against the Drukhari. Instead, they adhered, constricting around the sorcerer's armor with increasing pressure. Ahriman's eyes widened behind his helmet. "You learn quickly," he acknowledged, voice strained. "But adaptation alone is insufficient." Blue fire erupted from Ahriman's form, burning through the binding bands. He raised his arms, and the chamber around them began to change. Walls melted, floors shifted. Reality itself seemed to become malleable as Ahriman imposed his will upon it. Strange recognized the technique, similar to his manipulation of the mirror dimension. But Ahriman was not creating a separate pocket reality. He was directly altering the material realm, a dangerous practice that threatened the fabric of space-time itself. "Stop," Strange warned. "This level of reality manipulation is unstable. You risk collapsing the dimensional boundaries." "Precisely," Ahriman replied. "The thinning of the veil will allow greater communion with the changer of ways. You will witness perfection." The air shimmered as entities began to materialize around them. Avian shapes with too many eyes, humanoid figures with twisted proportions. Daemons, Strange realized. manifestations of the warp's consciousness taking physical form through Ahriman's working. This had gone far enough. Tzeentch centered himself, focusing on the core principles of his mystical training. The multiverse operated on consistent laws, regardless of local variations. If the walls between dimensions were thinning, he could exploit that weakness. By the Vishanti and the seven sons of Cinnabus, Tzeentch intoned, weaving complex patterns with his fingers. I invoke the crimson dimension of Sitarak, the purple dimension of Agamotto, the air dimension of Bhaskara. Power surged through Tzeentch as he connected to these external realms. They existed outside the influence of this universe's warp, untainted by its corrupting presence. Through these connections, Tzeentch could access power that Ahriman and his demonic master could not easily counter. The chamber filled with light of impossible colors as multiple dimensional energies converged. The manifesting daemons shrieked as their forms destabilized, caught between the warp and Tzeentch's invoked dimensions. Ahriman staggered backward, his armor cracking under the pressure of conflicting dimensional forces. "Impossible," he gasped. "Your power draws from outside the great ocean. How?" Tzeentch did not answer, focusing entirely on maintaining the dimensional confluence while directing its energy toward banishing the demonic entities and stabilizing the local reality. Golden mandalas expanded outward from his hands, reinforcing the natural laws of this universe against Ahriman's corrupting influence. The sorcerer in blue armor raised his staff in desperation, attempting to counter Tzeentch's working with raw warp power. For a moment, the energies balanced precariously, neither practitioner able to overwhelm the other. Then Tzeentch played his final card. He activated the Eye of Agamotto, its green light cutting through the chaotic energies like a beacon of order. Time itself slowed around Ahriman, his movements becoming sluggish as Tzeentch accelerated his own time stream. In the relative eternity of that moment, Tzeentch completed a complex banishment ritual, targeting not Ahriman himself, but his connection to the warp. The spell struck true, temporarily severing the sorcerer from his power source. Ahriman roared in frustration as his demonic manifestations dissolved into smoke. The reality distortions he had created snapped back into normal space, the chamber returning to its original state. He fell to one knee, psychic energy bleeding from his armor like steam. "What manner of being are you?" he demanded, voice hoarse. "No Psyker can command such power without the warp. No mortal can channel such energies without corruption." Tzeentch descended to the floor, the cloak settling around his shoulders. The dimensional energies he had invoked receded, returning to their native planes. "As I told you, I'm not from your reality," Tzeentch said. "Where I come from, order and chaos exist in balance. Magic flows from many sources, not just a single corrupting dimension. I've spent decades learning to master these forces without surrendering to them." Ahriman studied him with new respect. "Then you are either the most dangerous being to enter this galaxy or its potential savior." He rose unsteadily to his feet. "Tzeentch will not release his claim on you easily, now that he has witnessed your potential. And the Imperium will hunt you as a witch of unprecedented threat." "I don't intend to stay long enough for either to be a concern," Tzeentch replied. "This reality is fundamentally unstable. The warp's influence corrupts everything it touches. I need to find a way back to my dimension before that corruption reaches me as well." Ahriman laughed bitterly. "You understand more than most who have dwelled here for centuries." He straightened, his armor resealing itself through some self-repair mechanism. "We shall meet again, Dr. Tzeentch. When you have seen more of this universe, you may find my offer more appealing. The path of the Thousand Suns offers mastery, not surrender." Before Tzeentch could respond, Ahriman vanished in a flash of blue flame, teleporting away through warp space. The sudden absence of his corrupting presence made the chamber feel emptier, but somehow cleaner. Tzeentch turned his attention back to the Infinity Circuit throne. Though Ahriman had claimed it was dead, Tzeentch sensed residual energy within it, not enough for the purpose he had initially imagined, but perhaps sufficient to provide some answers. He approached the throne carefully, hands extended to sense its psychic architecture. The wraithbone construction hummed in response to his proximity, recognizing the touch of a consciousness attuned to mystic energies. Tzeentch placed his scarred hands on the armrests, closing his eyes as he opened his mind to the craft world's residual memories. Visions flooded his consciousness. The craft world in its prime, filled with the tall, graceful Eldar, their civilization at its height, masters of technology and psychic arts that blended seamlessly. Then horror, as their empire collapsed under the weight of its own excess. The birth of a new chaos god from their depravity, their desperate flight into the void, preserving what remained of their culture aboard these world ships. And finally, the end of this particular craft world. An imperial fleet. Boarding actions. Desperate last stands in these very corridors as human zealots purged the alien presence. The Infinity Circuit preserved the souls of the dead, but with no living Eldar to maintain it, those souls had gradually faded into the warp despite the protections. Tzeentch withdrew from the visions, his mind reeling from the scale of the tragedy he had witnessed. An entire civilization destroyed by the very dimensional forces he had felt pressing against reality. And in their fall, they had strengthened those forces, creating a feedback loop of destruction. He stood from the throne, his course clearer now. This craft world was a temporary haven at best. The Imperium would return, as would the Drukhari raiders, and possibly Ahriman or others like him. Tzeentch needed more information about this reality, and a secure location to work on a way home. The cloak of levitation tightened around his shoulders, responding to his resolve. Tzeentch reached into his tunic, withdrawing the sling ring. It had failed to open a portal home earlier, the dimensional coordinates meaningless in this reality. But perhaps with the knowledge he had gained from the Infinity Circuit, he could at least transport himself elsewhere in this galaxy. Tzeentch focused on the images he had gleaned from the craft world's memories. Another Eldar location, one that still lived, a place called Ulthwé, a craft world known for its powerful Psykers and prophetic abilities. If any could help him understand the warp enough to navigate home, it would be them. The sling ring sparked as Tzeentch rotated his hand, creating a portal. The circular gateway opened sluggishly, the energies resisting his will more than they ever had before. Through it, he glimpsed a location very different from the dead halls around him. Living wraithbone, pulsing with psychic light. Robed figures turning in surprise at the unexpected dimensional breach. Tzeentch stepped through, the cloak billowing behind him as the portal closed, leaving the empty craft world to its silence once more. The seers of Ulthwé reacted with astonishing speed to Tzeentch's arrival. Before his portal had fully closed, he found himself surrounded by warriors in black and bone-colored armor, their weapons trained on him. Behind them stood the seers themselves, tall Eldar in elaborate robes adorned with runes that glowed with psychic energy. "Hold," commanded one of the seers, his voice resonating with authority. "This one comes unexpectedly, yet his arrival was glimpsed in the skein of fate." The warriors did not lower their weapons, but they made no move to attack. Tzeentch remained still, hands visible, projecting peaceful intentions. "I apologize for the intrusion," Tzeentch said. "I am Dr. Stephen Tzeentch, master of the mystic arts, and I find myself stranded in your reality." The lead seer approached, his movements graceful despite his apparent age. His eyes were milky white, yet Tzeentch sensed he perceived far more than mere physical sight would allow. "I am Farseer Ethrael," the Eldar said. "Your presence ripples through the webway and disturbs the patterns we have long observed. You are not of this universe, yet you wield its energies with curious proficiency." Tzeentch inclined his head respectfully. "I am a quick study when necessity demands it, but my understanding remains limited. I seek knowledge to help me return to my own dimension before the corruption of the warp takes hold." Ethrael gestured, and the warriors stepped back, though they remained vigilant. "Come, the Dome of Crystal Seers is a more appropriate place for this discussion." Strange followed the Farseer through corridors far more vibrant than those of the dead craft world he had left. Living Wraithbone pulsed with psychic energy, responding to the emotions and thoughts of the Eldar who passed through. Civilians watched him with undisguised curiosity and suspicion, many retreating into adjacent chambers at his approach. "Your kind fears humans," Strange observed. "With good reason," Ethrael replied. "The Mon-K Imperium would gladly see all Eldari exterminated. Our darker kin have done little to improve your species' reputation, and individual humans with psychic gifts typically bring catastrophe in their wake." "I am aware of the dangers," Strange said. "I've encountered entities from your warp already. A sorcerer named Ahriman attempted to recruit me to his cause." Ethrael stopped abruptly, turning to face Strange with new intensity. "You encountered the arch-sorcerer of the Thousand Suns and lived to speak of it. Few can claim such a distinction." "We reached an impasse," Strange said simply. "His power is considerable, but draws from sources I find problematic." The Farseer studied him for a long moment before continuing their journey. "Perhaps you are not entirely foolish for a human." They entered a vast dome where crystalline statues stood in concentric circles. Each statue, Strange realized, had once been a living Eldar seer, their bodies transformed in death to preserve their psychic essence. The air hummed with contained power, the accumulated wisdom of generations. At the center of the dome stood a raised platform with a pool of what appeared to be liquid crystal. Other seers waited there, their expressions grave as Strange approached. "The human anomaly," said one, a female Eldar whose robes bore more elaborate runes than the others. "His coming represents a bifurcation point in the skein." "Indeed, Farseer Macha," Ethrael agreed. "The paths of fate grow clouded around his presence. Some lead to devastation, others to unexpected salvation." Strange looked between them. "You've foreseen my arrival?" "Not specifically," Macha replied. "But disturbances in the great ocean have been growing for cycles. The changer of ways stirs with unusual purpose. Now we understand why." Strange approached the crystal pool. "You mean the entity called Tzeentch has anticipated my crossing between realities?" The Farseers exchanged glances. "You speak the name with dangerous casualness, human," Ethrael warned. "But yes, the architect of fate perceives much that others cannot. If your arrival creates possibility for significant change, it would naturally draw his attention." "I have no intention of becoming a pawn in some cosmic game," Strange said firmly. "I need only to understand this reality's dimensional structure enough to find my way home." Macha gestured to the pool. "Then gaze into the pools of becoming, if you dare. They show truth to those strong enough to withstand it." Strange hesitated only briefly before stepping to the edge of the pool. The liquid crystal within swirled with colors and patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the physical eye could perceive. He knelt, bringing his face closer to the surface. Reflections formed and dissolved. Strange saw himself as he had been, performing the fateful spell that had torn him from his reality. He saw the accident for what it truly was, no accident at all, but a deliberate interference from this side of the dimensional barrier. Tendrils of warp energy had reached across the void, latching onto his spell and pulling him through. The vision shifted, showing paths branching outward from his arrival. In one, he allied with the Imperium, using his powers to reinforce the barriers between real space and the warp. In another, he joined with Ahriman, seeking forbidden knowledge that ultimately consumed him. In a third, he was captured by the Drukhari, his suffering feeding their immortality for centuries. And in one, most disturbing of all, he ascended to become a new power in the warp itself, neither daemon nor god, but something unique that forever altered the balance of this universe. Strange pulled back from the pool, his mind reeling from the possibilities it had shown. The Farseers watched him intently, gauging his reaction. "You understand now," Ethrael said. "Your presence here is no mere accident. You have been drawn into a game whose scope exceeds even your considerable understanding." "I refuse to be manipulated," Strange said. his voice steady despite the disturbing visions. "In my reality, I have faced dimensional entities of similar malevolence. They can be resisted. They can be defeated." Macha laughed, a sound like crystal chimes. "Your confidence would be amusing if it were not so dangerous. The Chaos Gods are not mere entities, human. They are the warp itself, given consciousness by the emotions of all sentient beings over millennia. They cannot be truly defeated while life exists." Strange absorbed this, reconciling it with what he had learned. Then containment is the only option. Separation between dimensions. "The Eldari Empire once maintained such separation," Ethriel said grimly. "Our technology and psychic mastery kept the veil strong, but we grew decadent, and in our excesses, we tore that veil asunder. The results," he gestured around them, "are evident. A reduced people, fleeing through space on world ships." Strange finished. "While your fallen kin raid and torture for immortality. You grasp the scope of our tragedy quickly," Macha acknowledged. "But what will you do with this understanding? The paths shown in the pool remain fluid. Your choices will solidify them." Before Strange could answer, alarms sounded throughout the craft world. The crystal dome shuddered as distant explosions registered through the Wraithbone structure. "We are under attack," Ethriel announced, though Strange suspected the Farseer had anticipated this. "The servants of the Corpse Emperor have followed your dimensional wake, human." Strange moved toward the dome's entrance. "Then I will help defend against them. I owe you that much for the knowledge you've shared." Ethriel raised a hand. "No, the Imperium is not the true threat." His milky eyes seemed to look beyond the physical realm. "The breach in real space that brought you here never fully closed. It widens now, allowing that which hungers to reach through." The Wraithbone walls around them began to warp and twist. Psychic energy crackled across surfaces as reality itself strained under some external pressure. Strange felt it immediately, the same predatory consciousness he had sensed upon his arrival, but magnified 1,000-fold. "The Changer of Ways reaches forth," Macha whispered, fear evident in her voice. "He has found the path to your reality, human sorcerer." Strange understood with sudden clarity. His transit had created a weakened point between dimensions. While he had been seeking knowledge, the entity called Tzeentch had been widening that breach, preparing to extend its influence into Strange's home dimension, a universe unprepared for the corrupting touch of chaos. "I won't allow that," Strange said, his resolve hardening. The cloak of levitation billowed around him as he gathered his power. "Show me to the breach." The Farseers led him swiftly through corridors now filled with panicking Eldar civilians and mobilizing warriors. They emerged onto an observation platform that offered a view of space beyond the craft world's protective dome. The void itself was tearing open. A vast rent in reality stretched across the starscape, its edges writhing with impossible colors and shapes that hurt the mind to observe. Imperial ships hung in space nearby, caught in the gravity of the anomaly, their hulls beginning to buckle under forces they were never designed to withstand. The Imperial fools sought to investigate the dimensional disturbance, Ethriel explained. They have instead provided the catalyst for its expansion. Their deaths feed the warp's hunger. Strange assessed the situation quickly. The breach was similar to those he had dealt with before, but its scale was unprecedented. And what lay beyond was not merely another dimension, but a realm of pure psychic energy given malevolent purpose. "I need to get closer," Strange decided. "Can your vessels take me there?" "It would be suicide," Macha objected. "Even our ships cannot approach such a breach safely." "I don't need safety," Strange countered. "I need proximity." After a brief consultation among themselves, the Farseers agreed. Strange was escorted to a sleek Eldar vessel that hummed with psychic technology. Its pilot, a grim warrior whose armor marked him as a veteran of countless battles, eyed Strange with undisguised suspicion. "The Mon-Ki wishes to die at the threshold of the warp," the pilot said. "I will oblige." The ship detached from the craft world, its wraithbone hull glowing with protective runes as It accelerated toward the breach. Through the vessel's crystalline viewport, Strange watched as they approached the roiling tier in spacetime. The Imperial ships grew larger in their field of vision, massive cathedral-like vessels now clearly in distress. Their engines flared erratically as they attempted to escape the breach's pull, but many were already too close. "The humans fire upon us," the pilot announced dispassionately as energy beams lanced out from the Imperial vessels. Wraithbone shields flared, absorbing the attacks. Their fear makes them predictable. "Can you get me within 100 meters of the breach?" Strange asked, ignoring the incoming fire. "I can reach 50 before the ship begins to lose structural integrity," the pilot replied with professional pride. "Whether you survive at that distance is another matter." The Eldar vessel danced through the Imperial barrage with impossible grace, its pilot manipulating controls that responded to thought as much as touch. They swept past a massive battleship, so close that Strange could see armored figures on its observation decks tracking their movement with massive weapons. As they approached the breach, reality itself began to distort around them. The ship's wraithbone structure keened in protest, resonating with the psychic energies pouring from the tier. Through the viewport, Strange could now see what lay beyond the breach, and the sight chilled him to his core. A landscape of impossible geometry stretched into infinity. Crystal spires floated among rivers of pure thought. Libraries containing knowledge from across time and space burned with multicolored flame that consumed not matter, but possibility itself. And dominating it all, a presence so vast that Strange could perceive only fragments of its totality, shifting between forms with dizzying speed. Tzeentch, the changer of ways. The god of hope and ambition turned malevolent. It had become aware of Strange's universe, a fresh realm of sentient minds to corrupt and transform. "Close enough," Strange announced. "Hold this position as long as you can." The pilot nodded grimly. "The vessel's psychic shielding will fail in approximately 3 minutes. After that, our souls belong to she who thirsts." Strange didn't waste time asking which entity that referred to. He moved to the airlock chamber, the cloak wrapping tightly around him as he prepared to expose himself to the void. The Eldar pilot watched with what might have been respect as Strange sealed the inner door behind him. "Your courage honors your primitive species, sorcerer," came the pilot's voice through a communication crystal. "May your soul find peace in whatever afterlife awaits you." Strange activated the outer door. Vacuum embraced him, but the cloak protected him from its deadly effects, maintaining a thin envelope of atmosphere around his body. He floated free of the ship, propelled toward the breach by the cloak's own power. As he approached the tear in reality, Strange felt the pull of the warp intensify. The corrupting influence of chaos reached for his mind, probing for weaknesses, fears, and ambitions to exploit. Strange reinforced his mental shields. Drawing on decades of mystical discipline, he halted 50 meters from the breach, suspended in space. From here, he could see the full extent of the damage. The tier was growing exponentially, feeding on the energy of the dying Imperial ships caught in its event horizon. Soon, it would be large enough for demonic entities to pour through, not just into this reality, but potentially into Strange's home dimension as well. Strange gathered his power, drawing not only on his own reserves, but on the mystical energies that permeated this universe. The Eye of Agamotto glowed at his throat, its power connecting to the time stream of this reality, so different from his own yet governed by the same fundamental laws. He began to weave a complex sealing spell, adapting the techniques he had, used to repair dimensional breaches in the past. Golden energy flowed from his hands, forming intricate patterns that wrapped around the edges of the tear. But the breach resisted, its chaotic energies fighting against the imposed order of Strange's magic. From within the warp, something pushed back. Strange felt Tzeentch's direct attention focus on him, a consciousness of such alien complexity that it threatened to overwhelm his sanity. The entity reached through the breach, not physically, but as pure conceptual force. "You seek to deny me a new realm, mortal sorcerer," came a voice that existed directly in Strange's mind. Yet you could rule there as my herald. Your ambition for knowledge mirrors my own nature. We are kindred." Strange ignored the voice, concentrating on his spell. The golden energy began to contract, forcing the edges of the breach closer together. But progress was slow, and the strain on Strange's body and mind increased with each passing second. "Your efforts are futile," Tzeentch continued. "This universe has already fallen to chaos. Yours will follow. It is inevitable. Change is the only constant. Change without purpose or direction is merely entropy." Strange countered, speaking into the void. "True mastery comes from guiding change toward harmony." The entity's amusement washed over Strange like a wave of madness. "Such limited perspective. I offer you visions of every possible future. Knowledge beyond mortal comprehension. Power to reshape reality according to your will." To punctuate this offer, knowledge began to flood into Strange's mind. Secrets of the multiverse that he had spent lifetimes seeking. Spells of such potency that they could rewrite the fundamental laws of existence. The cure for his damaged hands, so simple that he marveled at never having discovered it himself. For a moment, Strange wavered. The temptation was profound, appealing to his deepest desires as a scholar and sorcerer. But within that knowledge, he sensed the trap. Accepting Tzeentch's gifts meant opening himself to the entity's influence, becoming a conduit for chaos rather than its opponent. "I've heard better offers," Strange declared, renewing his focus on the sealing spell. "And from entities with better fashion sense." The amusement vanished, replaced by cold rage that manifested as crystalline shards of thought piercing at Strange's mental defenses. "Then you will be broken, and your dimension will burn regardless." The attack was powerful enough that Strange's concentration faltered. The golden energy of his spell wavered, allowing the breach to widen further. Through it, Strange glimpsed shapes moving in the warp, gathering for the crossing. Daemons of Tzeentch, entities of pure change and mutation, eager to spread their master's influence. Strange realized that his approach was flawed. He was attempting to seal the breach using only his own power, when what he needed was to redirect the enormous energies already present. The Imperial ships, the Eldar vessel, even the breach itself, all contained power that could be harnessed. He altered his strategy, extending his awareness to encompass the entire area around the breach. The dying Imperial ships radiated energy as their warp drives overloaded. The Eldar vessel pulsed with psychic potential, and the breach itself was nothing but raw power in a destructive form. Strange began a new incantation, the words echoing strangely in the void of space. "By the rings of Ragador and the crimson bands of Sitarak, I transmute chaos to order, entropy to purpose." His hands wove new patterns, no longer attempting to seal the breach directly. Instead, he created a complex dimensional lattice around it, a structure designed to channel and redirect energy. The golden light of his magic connected to the Imperial ships, drawing forth the power of their failing reactors. It reached the Eldar vessel, syncing with its wraithbone resonance. Finally, it extended tendrils into the breach, in itself, not fighting against the warp energies, but guiding them into new configurations. Tzeentch's presence surged against this working, recognizing the threat it posed. "You cannot control the warp, mortal. It is change incarnate. I don't seek to control it," Strange replied, his voice strained but determined, merely to direct it. The lattice began to glow brighter as energy flowed through it, following the path Strange had defined. The breach's wild, chaotic emissions became structured, cyclical. Instead of expanding outward, the energies began to turn inward, creating a self-contained loop. The strain on Strange was immense. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the vacuum of space, instantly freezing into tiny crystals that the cloak swept away. His hands trembled violently, the old injury magnified by the effort of maintaining such complex mystical geometry. Through the failing viewports of the Imperial ships, human crew members watched in awe as the maelstrom of chaotic energy gradually transformed. What had been a ragged tear leaking corruption became a perfect circle of swirling power, like a controlled whirlpool in the fabric of space-time. "This changes nothing," Tzeentch hissed in Strange's mind. "You merely delay the inevitable. All barriers fall. All order descends to chaos eventually." "Perhaps," Strange acknowledged, "but not today, and not by your hand." With a final gesture, Strange completed the transformation. The breach collapsed in on itself, its energies turned back toward the warp in a concentrated beam that pierced deep into that chaotic dimension. Strange glimpsed Tzeentch's domain recoiling from this unexpected counterstrike, crystal towers shattering and impossible landscapes reforming to avoid the beam's touch. The connection between dimensions snapped shut with a concussive wave of force that sent Strange tumbling backward through space. The Imperial ships that had survived were pushed outward by the same wave, their systems temporarily overloaded but their structures intact. The Eldar vessel danced through the turbulence with preternatural grace, eventually stabilizing at a safe distance. Strange floated in the void, exhausted but triumphant. The breach was sealed, the connection to his home dimension severed before Tzeentch could establish a foothold there. But he had also closed his own path home in the process. The Eldar vessel approached, maneuvering alongside him. The airlock opened, and Strange allowed the cloak to carry him inside. As atmosphere flooded the chamber, he collapsed to his knees, his reserves of strength finally depleted. The pilot met him as the inner door opened. "You succeeded," the Eldar stated, surprise evident in his voice. "The breach is closed." "At a cost," Strange replied wearily. "I've sealed myself in your reality." "Perhaps not permanently," came another voice. Farseer Ethriel stood in the ship's main compartment, his expression unreadable. "Your actions have earned you the gratitude of Ulthwé. That is not a common occurrence for your species." Strange rose unsteadily to his feet. "I didn't do it for gratitude. The breach threatened all realities, including my own." "Nevertheless," Ethriel continued, "what I glimpsed in the skein of fate suggests your path home may yet exist. But it will require time, resources, and knowledge that only the Eldari possess." "Why would you help me?" Strange asked. The Farseer's expression hardened. "The architect of fate rarely suffers such direct opposition. His attention will now be fixed upon you, and by extension, upon those who harbor you. Our fates are intertwined, whether we wish it or not." As the Eldar vessel returned to the craft world, Strange watched through the viewport as the Imperial ships regrouped. They had withdrawn to a safer distance but remained present, their weapons undoubtedly trained on the Xenos craft. "The Monkey will not simply depart," the pilot observed. "They have witnessed power they do not understand, and their response will be predictable." "Aggression," Strange concluded, followed by attempted capture and interrogation. Ethriel nodded. "The Imperium fears what it cannot control. And you, Dr. Strange, represent their greatest fear, power outside their Emperor's domain." The craft world of Ulthwé loomed larger in the viewport, its black surface inlaid with bone-colored runes of protection and foresight. Strange felt a moment of connection with these aliens who, like him, walked the path of mystical knowledge and paid the price for their pursuit of power. "How long will your craft world remain here?" Strange asked. "We depart as soon as all vessels are recovered," Ethriel replied. "The webway gate awaits our transition. The Imperium cannot follow where we travel." Strange nodded, already formulating plans. He would need time to recover, to study this reality's dimensional structure in greater detail. The Eldar possessed knowledge that might help him create a new path home, one that bypassed the warp entirely. But the path would be long and fraught with dangers he could scarcely imagine. The Imperium, the forces of chaos, the Drukhari raiders who had marked him, all would seek to claim or destroy him. In this grim, dark future, survival alone would be a victory. As the Eldar vessel docked with the craft world, Strange felt a presence brush against his mind. Not the overwhelming force of Tzeentch, but something subtler, more focused. A consciousness of vast intellect and unfathomable purpose, observing him from across the stars. "The Changer has marked you, but others watch as well," came a voice that seemed to bypass his mental shields effortlessly. "The great game has a new piece on the board. We shall meet when the moment is right." The contact withdrew as suddenly as it had come, leaving Strange with a vision of golden armor and a sense of immeasurable age. Another player in this universe's cosmic drama, taking notice of the dimensional interloper, Strange followed Ethereal from the ship, his expression set with determination. This universe had drawn him in against his will, but he would not be its victim or its pawn. He would find his way home, and perhaps in the process, bring something this grim reality sorely needed. Hope, change with purpose, the possibility of a better future. The Sorcerer Supreme straightened his shoulders, the cloak of levitation settling around him like a mantle of authority. The craftworld of Ulthve entered the webway, vanishing from real space in a flash of psychic light, carrying its unexpected human ally toward destinies that even the Farseers could not fully predict. In the warp, the crystal labyrinth of Tzeentch reconfigured itself, damaged sections regenerating into new and more complex forms. At its center, the Architect of Fate contemplated the interloper who had dared to defy him. Such resistance was rare and worthy of special attention. New plots unfolded, new schemes took shape. The game continued, with a new player whose moves could not be easily anticipated. Tzeentch, ever the master of the long view, felt something almost like satisfaction. After all, what was chaos without the challenge of true change? Far across the galaxy, on Terra itself, the Emperor stirred in his half-life upon the Golden Throne. His consciousness, fragmented across time and space, momentarily coalesced around a singular awareness. Something fundamental had changed in the tapestry of fate. A golden tear rolled down the withered cheek of the corpse god, unnoticed by the attending tech priests. Whether it was shed in hope or dread, not even the Emperor himself could say. For in the grim darkness of the far future, certainty was the greatest illusion of all.